Mark Ruffalo, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, quietly entered a luxury car dealership. It was an ordinary day for him, but what was about to unfold would change everything. When his identity was revealed, the events that unfolded would not only be surprising, but unforgettable. Before we get into this story, let me know where you're watching it in the comments. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel because another special story is coming tomorrow. It was an ordinary morning in Los Angeles. The sky clear as if something special was about to happen. Mark Ruffalo walked in a loose jacket and faded jeans. His relaxed demeanor contrasted with the admiring glances of the few who recognized him. He was his usual self, unfazed by fame. He smiled at one, said thanks to another, and continued on his way, walking slowly. He stopped midway at a cafe he had frequented for years. He addressed the barista by name, as he always did. "Good morning, Oliver. How's business?" "Same, Mark. Same as always." "Same one, please." He lost himself in thought as he waited for his coffee. He had something he'd been searching for months. This wasn't just any request. It was about turning his passion for cars into a meaningful project. Perhaps a special vehicle to restore, perhaps for donations, or for a special memory. He grabbed his coffee and continued on his way. He had a specific destination in mind, a renowned dealership specializing in exclusive luxury vehicles. This was precisely where he hoped to find what he wanted. An air of luxury greeted Mark as he stepped through the glass door. The floors gleamed, the vehicle's flawless surfaces reflecting the light. Footsteps were muffled by soft carpets, and the air held a distinctive scent of brand new leather. Elegantly dressed employees served customers adorned with expensive suits and elegant accessories. Mark's simplicity went almost unnoticed. Almost. A few curious glances, followed by whispers, followed. He ignored all this, focusing solely on what was important. His eyes were fixated on a car in the back corner of the lounge. It seemed to have come from another time. Its curvaceous lines, pristine paint, and distinguished presence captivated him. He approached with determined steps. He turned to a sales assistant engrossed in his phone. "Excuse me, can I get some information about this model?" he asked, his voice calm and gentle. The man looked up only briefly, said casually, "Let me call someone," and walked away without a backward glance. Mark followed the man with his eyes, his face remaining calm, but the slight crease between his eyebrows betrayed his shifting emotions. He was uncomfortable, but he didn't show it. Still, he remained seated, intently examining the car. Meanwhile, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. This wasn't felt directly through his actions, but through the glances and whispers exchanged between the employees. "Does he even know what this place is?" one asked quietly. "He doesn't look like he'd buy a car here," another replied. Mark heard but didn't show it. He rubbed his chin, a gesture that masked his discomfort. He didn't want to react just yet. He remained standing by the car, waiting for a response. Then he realized someone was approaching him. It was the manager, with his upright gait and measuring gaze. Every step carried a sense of judgmental tension. The manager finally stopped in front of Mark. He looked at the car, then at him. He smiled slightly as he looked at the car. "This model is a special one, quite rare," the manager said, more like a test than a statement. "Just what I'm looking for," Mark said, his voice clear but still polite. The manager looked him up and down once more. His gaze held a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "I hope you're ready. This car isn't for everyone." Mark kept eye contact, smiling quietly, but his gaze remained fixed, not backing down. The manager took a step back and folded his arms. Unbeknownst to anyone, Mark was no ordinary man. The man standing before them wasn't just a customer. He was one of the most respected actors in the world. Someone exemplary in both his talent and his presence. When he finally realized who he was, the consequences would be not only surprising but unforgettable. Mark continued to examine the rare car, the texture of the body, the flawless shine of the paint, the classic design. All of it filled him with genuine awe. It was exactly what he was looking for. But the atmosphere around him was a stark contrast to this beautiful moment. The stares and whispers circulating in his ear had become increasingly unsettling. A few minutes later, the manager finally reappeared. Richard, with his stern stance and piercing gaze, approached, each step seeming to signal his status. He stopped a few feet from Mark, folded his arms, and smiled. But the smile was more of a challenge. "Is there interest in this model?" Richard asked, almost mockingly. "Yes, it's an impressive vehicle. I'd like to know more about it," Mark said, still calm. Richard looked him up and down, taking a long look at his faded jeans and worn jacket. He raised an eyebrow, as if surprised that this man would dare to come here like this. "Interesting," he said sarcastically. "These models are among the most exclusive. Most people are content just to see them. Owning them is another matter." Mark didn't back down, but the rising tension was now palpable. Richard shifted slightly to the side, as if trying to stop Mark from approaching the car. "You realize, right, this vehicle costs more than some houses in Beverly Hills. Cars like this aren't something just anyone can take home," Richard continued, his voice now harsher. Mark frowned slightly but maintained his tone before replying, "I know, that's why I'm here. I'm interested. Could you tell me more?" He tried to ignore the manager's aggressive tone. Richard let out a dry laugh, more condescension than amusement. He crossed his arms again and leaned forward slightly. "I don't know how to put it, but these types of cars appeal to a niche clientele. People who know what they're buying, you know? With all due respect, you don't look like that profile at all." Mark took a deep breath, his irritation giving way to the anger he was trying to suppress. He tilted his head slightly, as if to ask if I'd heard correctly. "Profile?" he repeated neutrally. "Yes, profile," Richard said emphatically. "Our cars aren't just any vehicles. They're symbols of status, success, privilege, which I'm sorry to say doesn't really match yours," he said, gesturing exaggeratedly at Mark's attire. The silence that ensued was deafening. Some employees forgot what they were doing and began watching the scene. Others pretended not to see. Mark didn't respond immediately. He stared at Richard for a long moment, seemingly weighing his words carefully. "It's interesting how quickly you figure people out just by looking at their clothes. It says a lot about you, not about me," he finally said, his voice still calm but with a tinge of harshness. Richard narrowed his eyes, his response clearly irritating him. He moved closer to Mark, invading his personal space. His voice lowered slightly, but his acidic tone remained the same. "Look, man," he said, "I've seen people like you a lot. They come in, watch the cars, fantasize a bit, then leave without spending a dime. If you're playing games, don't waste my time or the time of my team." Mark's stance now reflected something different. It wasn't just patience. There was a quiet but clear determination in his eyes. "What if I'm here for real, not just to dream?" he asked simply. Richard laughed a short laugh and shook his head, seeming to find the question absurd. "Then you're in the wrong place," he said. "This place is for those who can pay and those who have something to prove. And frankly, you don't seem to have either." The air around him grew even heavier, almost oppressive. Mark stared at Richard for a moment longer. His discomfort had now turned into something deeper. Suppressed anger. He smiled slightly, not joy, but a smile that showed he understood the other person completely. "Funny. I always thought true luxury was treating people with respect. Maybe you should consider that too," Mark said, his voice calm but sharp. Mark stood tall before Richard, the manager. Richard now radiated anger and contempt with every sentence. The tension had grown so high that employees and customers alike watched the scene unconcealed. Richard's hostile tone sharpened. He spoke as if he had to win this argument. "People like you just come and waste everyone's time," he said sarcastically. "This isn't a park. It's not a place to daydream with an old jacket and empty pockets." Mark tilted his head slightly to the side, studying the man before him closely. His eyes were calm but penetrating. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You talk about wasting time, but you're so busy judging people by what they wear that you can't see who they are. Maybe you should consider what really matters," he said firmly. Richard narrowed his eyes, his face flushed with anger. He moved closer to Mark, invading his personal space. "I know exactly what matters," he snapped, his voice venomous. "And I'm certainly not going to take moral lessons from someone who thinks they belong here. You don't know who you're dealing with." Mark didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on Richard. This stance only fueled the warden's anger further. When his words had no effect, Richard lost control completely. "You don't tell me what to do," he shouted, raising his fist as if to intimidate or frighten Mark. Mark was perhaps even about to be attacked, but he reacted quickly, with the composure of someone accustomed to tense situations. He raised his hand and caught Richard's fist in midair. The gesture was determined, but not aggressive. It was intended to prevent, not react. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. Richard froze, surprised that his fist had been stopped so easily. The entire showroom fell silent. Everyone was transfixed. Mark looked directly into Richard's eyes. His face was no longer angry, but his voice carried a shocking force when he spoke. "This anger has nothing to do with me. Maybe you should confront your inner turmoil first, then stop attacking others." He released Richard's fist with the same calm demeanor. The manager took a step back, clearly shaken, but he regained his composure and tried to maintain a strong presence. Mark straightened his jacket, stepped back slightly, and glanced at Richard one last time. "Respect costs nothing, but for some, it's harder to find than the rarest car here," he said. Without waiting for an answer, he began walking toward the showroom exit. There was still absolute silence inside. Only his clear footsteps echoed across the shiny floor. The employees and customers stood stock still, seemingly holding their breath. They could hardly believe what had just happened. Then Mark's attention was drawn to a young man standing in the corner. He held his phone. It seemed he had recorded not just the final moment, but the entire scene. Mark paused for a moment, their eyes locked. The young man was tense but resolute. He gave a small nod, a silent gesture of solidarity. Mark smiled a faint smile in return and walked away through the glass door into the Los Angeles sunshine. Inside, Richard was trying to gather his composure, but the silence around him and the accusatory looks from the employees made it clear that something had changed. The video he had shot wouldn't remain secret for long. The world would know soon enough. The consequences of what happened in the showroom would be both devastating and inevitable. The next morning, the world knew everything. The young man, who had silently recorded every moment, shared the footage on social media. Within hours, the video was shared by thousands. Outrage over Mark Ruffalo's treatment grew rapidly. The contrast was striking. A man known for his humility was being humiliated by someone filled with arrogance. The video begins with Richard ignoring Mark and making derogatory remarks. But the breaking point was clear. When the manager launched an attack, Mark calmly stopped him. Mark's quote went viral. "Respect costs nothing, but it seems rarer than the cars here." The phrase was everywhere: posts, memes, headlines. The comments online were endless. How could someone do this to Mark Ruffalo? He's one of the kindest people in Hollywood. That manager thinks he's superior. It's shameful. Mark once again taught arrogant people a lesson with grace. Legend. Let this be a lesson. Don't judge people by their appearance. Entertainment blogs and news sites immediately seized on the story. This wasn't just a disrespect to a customer. It was a disgrace to one of the world's most respected actors. The public not only defended Mark, but also harshly criticized the elitist and prejudiced behavior at the luxury venues. The impact on the dealership was immediate and devastating. The company's social media accounts were filled with angry comments. Everyone was demanding an explanation and an apology. Reactions came from all over the world. People declared boycotts and demanded the manager's dismissal. Richard tried to defend the situation, but every statement made matters worse. They were excuse-filled and insincere. He showed no real remorse. When he said it was a misunderstanding, he failed to convince anyone. "I didn't recognize Mr. Ruffalo right away. My actions were misunderstood," Richard said. But the public wouldn't buy it. Public anger had reached an unstoppable point. Some employees at the dealership, despite fearing they might lose their jobs, began making anonymous statements to the press. "Richard was always like this," one said. "He belittled everyone, rich or poor." These statements further fueled public anger. The dealership lost its major customers. Sales plummeted. No one wanted to be seen in a place associated with this tarnished reputation. While the world was discussing this incident, Mark remained silent. He was never one for revenge. He reflected on what was happening at home, within the simple life that had always defined him. He knew this incident wasn't an isolated incident. Judging by appearance, social class, or financial status was still all too common. This experience shouldn't remain a mere scandal, so he decided to do something meaningful. He shared his thoughts with a close friend. The video is out and people are reacting, but I don't want this to be just a crisis. I want to do something that truly inspires change. So what are you going to do? His friend asked. With a slight but determined smile, Mark replied, I'll handle it my way. He knew he had to return to the dealership, not for revenge, but to turn this incident into a powerful lesson. After he hung up, he thought about the car. It was still on his mind. It had become a symbol for him, a vehicle that showed him what he could learn from this experience. I have to go back, he thought. The question on his mind was, what would he do when he returned? Days passed. The video was still topping social media and headlines. Mark Ruffalo's name was constantly trending. Yet he chose to stay out of the spotlight. As always, he didn't speak publicly. But deep down, he knew this story had to reach a meaningful conclusion. And that afternoon, Mark returned to the same dealership. There were no bodyguards, no cameras, no applause, just him and his own serene presence. There was no announcement of his visit, no security, no cameras, just Mark and his calm, serene presence. But something was different this time. Everyone in the showroom knew who he was. The moment he walked through the door, the employees froze. Some looked nervous, others embarrassed. Richard, the manager, tried to stand upright behind the counter, but his old, confident demeanor was gone. His face was pale, his posture hesitant. The showroom, once crowded and lively, was now nearly empty. The effects of the boycott were evident. Mark walked toward the car that had first caught his eye. He placed his hand on the hood, running his fingers over the surface, just as he had when he first arrived. But this time, the tension wasn't in the car, but in the room. He felt Richard's gaze on the back of his neck, a look filled with fear and suppressed regret. Finally, Richard mustered his courage and walked toward him, but there was no trace of the arrogance of days before. He looked smaller, almost crushed. Mr. Ruffalo, he said, his voice low and halting, I want to apologize for what happened. I think we got off to a bad start. Maybe we can start over. I'd like to show you that car. Mark turned slowly, his eyes locked on Richard. The manager couldn't hold his gaze for long, and he swallowed. Start over? Mark said, his voice calm but piercing. I don't think you understand. The problem here isn't just how you treat me, it's how you treat people. Richard wanted to answer, but the words caught in his throat. Mark took a step back but didn't release his gaze. Respect isn't negotiable. It's not given only to those you think they deserve. Respect is fundamental. You either have it or you don't, he said. His voice carried to every corner of the showroom. Richard tried to say something, but Mark raised his hand slightly, demanding he listen. I came here looking for something special, something meaningful. But what I found is too profound to be fixed with an apology. That's why I won't be buying this car, at least not from this showroom. His words were heavy. Richard felt himself sink at that moment. As Mark spoke, Richard seemed to shrink even further. The surrounding employees and customers listened in complete silence. Every word sank in. Mark took a step toward the exit, but before he reached the door, he stopped, turned, and looked at Richard. I hope this serves as a lesson not just for you, but for everyone here. True luxury isn't about the label or the price tag. True luxury is about treating people with dignity. And sadly, this is rarer than any car I've seen here, he said. With these words, he left the dealership, leaving a heavy silence behind. Days later, the video was still circulating. But now, people weren't just talking about the showroom incident, but about how Mark had turned that disrespect into a universal lesson. Once again, he had become a symbol of humility and quiet strength. Mark eventually bought the car from another dealership. It was a modest place, devoid of ostentation and prioritizing human values. The owner was a middle-aged man named Sam. He was known for treating every customer equally. When Mark entered, Sam greeted him with a warm smile. Welcome, how can I help you? He asked. I'm looking for something special, Mark said. A car that means something more. I think you can help me. Their communication was sincere, free of judgment or prejudice. Finally, Mark found the car he was looking for. He took a photo with Sam and his team and shared it on social media. He captioned it with a single powerful sentence: "True luxury is being treated with respect. Thank you for reminding me of that." This post quickly went viral. The new showroom attracted attention for its exemplary customer service. People flocked to witness the existence of a place where dignity comes first. Mark's gesture had a global impact. People began sharing their own stories of prejudice, discrimination, and resistance. Campaigns promoting respect and inclusivity proliferated, and businesses were called upon to reconsider their behavior. The movement Mark initiated swept social media. Celebrities, activists, and brands turned the incident into an opportunity for self-awareness. Even some luxury car brands began to issue more inclusive messages to protect their reputations, because no one wanted to be associated with a crisis like that one. Meanwhile, the original showroom, where the incident began, continued to pay a heavy price. Richard was fired after receiving intense criticism and losing customers. The showroom underwent restructuring, but the damage to its reputation had already reached an irreversible point. The incident became a cautionary tale in the business world. Respect isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. Mark, with his usual humility, said, "This has nothing to do with who I am. It's about what I do, how well I'm known. The issue is, how do we treat each other? Respect isn't about what we have, it's about our humanity. It's a fundamental right that should be granted to everyone equally." When asked what he had learned from this incident, Mark smiled slightly. Even difficult moments can become opportunities for change. Respect costs nothing, but when you give, it becomes something powerful enough to transform the world. The car Mark bought was no longer just an object. It was restored and sold at a major charity auction. The millions of dollars raised were donated to organizations working on equality and inclusion. At the event, Mark gave a short but unforgettable speech. This car was just an object until it lived a story. Now it carries something far more valuable: our power to create change. And that power, when channeled with respect, reaches its true meaning. The evening ended with applause, not just for Mark, but for the powerful message he sent to the world. What began with prejudice and disrespect had ended with transformation and inspiration. Mark Ruffalo demonstrated that even in the face of injustice, it is possible to act with dignity and transform negativity into positive action. The world has moved on, but the lesson remains. Even in the simplest moments, the respect we show defines us. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to discover our other stories of hope, compassion, and resilience. Tap to discover more and discover inspiration.